In August 1914, German soldiers dug themselves into these French mountains. For the next 4 years, thousands of French and German soldiers died fighting for this ridge. I'm looking for the deadliest World War I battlefield you've never heard of. Hello everyone. I'm in eastern France on the western edge of the Vosges Mountains, pretty much in the middle between Nancy and Strasbourg, looking for a battlefield that might be pretty much unknown to the most of people. Well, locally it's famous, but on a wider scale pretty much unknown. Also because research work on this battlefield was quite difficult, if not nearly impossible. But let's see what can be found here. The Col de la Chapelotte sits at 450 meters elevation, a mountain pass carved through dense forest that controls the only practical route between the Vosges foothills and the Lorraine plain below. It's not dramatic elevation, just thick woods, steep slopes and a narrow corridor of open ground at the summit. But in 1914, geography was destiny. Whoever held this ridge controlled the southern approach to Epinal, the fortress city anchoring France's eastern defences, and beyond Epinal lay Nancy, the linchpin of the entire French front in Lorraine. In August 1914, German forces pushed west after their decisive victory at Morhange on August 20th. The Battle of Morhange shattered the French offensive in Lorraine. 2 entire army corps routed, thousands captured, the survivors streaming back toward their own borders in chaos. The entire Lorraine front was collapsing. French Second Army was in retreat. German Sixth Army, under Crown Prince Ruprecht of Bavaria, sensed an opportunity not just to halt the French offensive, but to destroy it completely. They pushed hard, pursuing the broken French units, probing for weak points. But here, at this pass, the French had to stop the advance. There was no choice. If the Germans broke through the Col de la Chapelotte, they'd have a clear path through the southern Vosges to outflank the fortress city of Epinal from an undefended direction. From here, they could wheel north and threaten Nancy from the rear, and if Nancy fell, the entire French position in Lorraine would unravel. This wasn't just another hilltop, this was a door that had to stay locked. The French First Army, commanded by General Auguste Dubail, held the line from here south to Belfort. Facing them across the Vosges Mountains was General Josias von Heringen's German 7th Army. Heringen had just successfully defended Alsace against the French invasion at Mulhouse in early August. His troops knew this ground, and they weren't going to give it back. The French threw everything they had at them. Chasseurs Alpins from Corsica, the 373rd Infantry Regiment, mountain troops who trained in the Alps, Alpine battalions from the Ubaye Valley in the southern French Alps, hardened men used to fighting at altitude, and colonial regiments rushed up from Lyon. These weren't second-line garrison troops or territorial reserves. They were France's elite mountain fighters, chasseurs specifically trained for forest and hill warfare, men who understood how to use terrain, how to move through dense woods without being seen, and how to hold ground that couldn't be taken by frontal assault alone. And the Germans? Bavarian infantry from the 16th Army Corps, troops from the Kingdom of Bavaria, took the hill. Many of these men were from the Lorraine border regions. They knew this terrain. They'd garrisoned Metz, patrolled these same forests during peacetime maneuvers, and when Bavarian infantry dug in, they dug deep and they dug smart. They didn't build hasty scrapes in the dirt at all. They erected engineered positions. Reinforced bunkers with overhead cover against shrapnel, communication trenches linking every position, dug out deep enough to survive heavy artillery, and so on. Observation posts on every high point. They laid out fields of fire, pre-sighted their machine guns, and wired the approaches. They weren't holding a line. They were building a fortress in the forest, and they weren't planning to leave. I'll give you a brief overview of the battlefield of today's video. We start by going through the German trenches and positions, then we walk through the so-called German village with its impressive buildings such as the field hospital and various tunnels. Continuing through the trenches, we go to the battlefield, past the mine crater and back through the French positions, of which unfortunately not much remains to be seen. This is the so-called Blockhaus du Collet, one of the most intact positions on the German line. It's built into the natural rock face with reinforced concrete forming the front wall. Behind the front line, the Germans built multi-level shelters, artillery-safe tunnels and multiple bunkers that we're going to have a look at later on. This first defensive line was called the Bismarckschanze. It runs along the ridge facing the French positions at the Couronne des Collins. The trenches themselves vary. Some sections are cut directly into bedrock where the sandstone would hold. Others are built up with earthworks and sandbags where the soil was too loose to excavate safely. In places where they had to dig through solid rock, the trenches have survived remarkably well. The stone holds its shape even after a century of freezing, thawing and root growth. In the softer sections, erosion has done more damage, but you can still trace the line. Obviously, these trenches weren't dug into soil. This is solid sandstone carved directly into the bedrock. Most of this work was done by hand, with picks, chisels and shovels. In some sections they had access to heavy equipment like pneumatic drills, but that was the exception rather than the rule. The majority of this rock was removed the hard way. So these trenches we just walked through that were hewn into the stone are the first German lines. And behind me in that rock over there, the structure that I've just filmed before, that was an observation post made out of concrete and pretty well blended into the landscape, into that pretty rocky landscape. And back then it would have offered a pretty good view over the area, which is now, well, forested again. But back then, over there would have been the French side of this battlefield. So they just sat here for 4 years and watched each other.
The Germans had one major advantage: time. They'd held this ridge since September 1914, which gave them months to establish infrastructure before the French could seriously contest the position. They brought in water lines to supply the troops and the field hospital, electrical generators for lighting in the underground shelters.
Here you can clearly see what remains of communication trenches. If you look closely, there's a whole network of trenches throughout this forest. Impressive.
But not every section is steep. Where the rock was too hard or the tactical situation didn't demand it, they dug shallow scrapes and built up the walls with concrete instead. But here, on the critical heights overlooking the Col, they carved deep into solid rock. The depth and permanence of these positions gave the Germans a huge defensive advantage. While French trenches in the lower ground would collapse during heavy rain or artillery bombardment, these rock-cut sections held their shape.
Here you can see a gunner's position, but maybe just for riflemen, maybe including a machine gun. That indicates clearly that this is the front trench, and it would make sense because the French would have been on the other side of the hill. Well, that hill we're on creates sort of a ridge back there in this direction, and that was where the French were sitting. We're now exploring, obviously, the German side of the front, with the trenches and bunkers, and soon after we're heading over to the French side. So in this area here, the Germans built an extensive network of trenches, tunnels, dugouts and so on. But well, regarding the dugouts, you know my stance. I don't crawl into any underground spaces, especially if you have a look at this one here. I wouldn't go in. So yeah, let's have a look at this trench here, front line trench. There's also some sort of dugout. As you can see, this trench network is running across the woods here.
You start to understand the scale when you realize there are dozens of these tunnel entrances scattered through the forest, each one connected to a larger system that's still down there, dark, flooded in places and completely off limits. The French knew these tunnels existed, they just never got close enough to map them before the Germans withdrew in 1918. Before they left, the Germans dynamited key sections. What you see now are fragments of something much larger that's been sealed underground for over a century. Behind the frontline trenches, the Germans carved an entire support network into these hillsides. The mentioned tunnels connected bunkers to ammunition depots and command posts to the field hospital. Some of them run hundreds of meters through solid rock. This area is known as the Village Allemand, the German village. It's not a single structure. It's an entire network of bunkers, shelters and support facilities concentrated in one sector behind the ridge. The Germans built this as their rear area command and logistics hub for the Chapelotte sector. Some of these larger structures were probably used as command posts, places where officers could coordinate artillery fire, plan operations and communicate with higher command without being exposed to French observation. You can see the difference in construction. The fighting bunkers up on the front line are compact, low profile and designed to withstand direct fire. These structures are bigger, with more interior space. They didn't need to be as heavily armored because they're protected by the ridge itself. A lot of these positions are connected by tunnels. These passages allow movement between different positions without exposing yourself to artillery fire. Some of them run for dozens of meters through solid rock.
Close to this massive troop barrack or whatever it was. You can see down there what appears to be the remains of another cable car station, which makes perfectly sense regarding steep terrain to bring up material and ammunition. Let's continue. That's the tunnel we just came out. There's another building, but it appears to have been blown apart. Let's go up the trench. Yeah, look at that. It has most certainly been blown. Or it got hit. Who knows? Back into the sand rock trenches. But as you can see here, they even had water supply.
The field hospital needed a position that was protected from direct fire, but still accessible enough to bring in wounded men from the front line. Behind this ridge, they had both. Wounded soldiers would be carried down the communication trenches to here, where they could receive initial treatment before being evacuated further to the rear. The hospital needed to be close enough to the fighting to save lives, but far enough back to operate without constant bombardment. You can clearly see how systematically this was planned. The storage bunkers for ammunition and supplies, the shelter bunkers where troops rotating off the line could rest, and the larger structures for command and medical functions. The underground tunnels, connections between them. Of course, the French had field hospitals and command posts too, but they were located further back in the valleys. The Germans, holding the high ground, could build their support infrastructure right behind the front line and still keep it relatively safe.
Okay.
As you have probably seen, the tunnel network here wasn't just for shelter, it was pure infrastructure. The Germans carved galleries through the sandstone to move men, ammunition and supplies towards the positions. Some of these are just a few meters deep, and others reach for hundreds and hundreds of meters. France's Geological Survey came through here in 2014 and counted dozens and dozens of entrances. Most are sealed now. Some collapsed naturally and others were deliberately blocked after engineers determined they were too unstable for public access. On the French side, tunnels were mostly for mine warfare. Offensive galleries dug toward German lines. On the German side, they were logistical.
You know the rules. I'm not going in. Doesn't look that safe either. That seems to be the other end of that tunnel we've just seen, but well, it looks a little sketchy to me. Well, but this would have been a direct connection between the backward positions, the field hospital, kitchen and so on, was these back trenches leading through communication trenches all in that direction towards the front line. And now let's check out the front line. Takes a little bit of walking, but that doesn't matter. So, just for orientation, we've come from down here where the field hospital and maybe the field kitchen, officers' quarters and so on are located. Well, we started back there, up that ridge, all along the German trenches, and now we're heading towards the front line and towards the French trenches. And as you can see here, we're gonna go through this communication trench, which is inevitably gonna lead us to the front line. So let's have a look. Looks like a basic dugout and a completely destroyed blockhouse bunker. I have no clue if it was an observation post overlooking the front or a machine gun position. I don't know, but it has been obliterated. Maybe a direct mortar hit, who knows.
As we're getting closer to the front line, I'm gonna tell you what happened up here. After the front stabilized in September 1914, the sector went quiet. Not peaceful, just static. Patrols tested each other's lines. Snipers worked at night. Artillery batteries traded fire, but there were no major offensives. That changed on February 26, 1915, when a German patrol probed the French positions here, held by the 70th Battalion of Chasseurs Alpins. They were testing the defenses, looking for weak points. The next morning, at 5:30, German artillery opened fire from positions north of the Roche-Ganneau ridge. At 6:15, infantry attacked uphill through the forest. By 8:30, the Germans had taken both the Haut des Planches and the Haut des Roches, the two high points flanking this col. They were within 800 meters of the pass itself. The French scrambled to respond. The 373rd Corsican Infantry was ordered to counterattack immediately, but a navigation error sent them in the wrong direction. By the time they arrived at 9 in the morning, the Germans had already consolidated their positions and the moment for a successful counterattack has passed. February 28, the French tried again. From 5:30 until 7:30 in the morning, French artillery batteries firing 65mm guns hammered the German positions right here, tearing apart the pine forest that covered the ridge. At 7:30, infantry from the 37th Colonial Regiment, the 31st Chasseurs Battalion and the 358th Infantry Regiment went over the top. They were cut down by German machine guns, positioned just nearby, and barbed wire that had been strung across their approach during the night. German after-action reports recovered 5 separate French attacks that day: 5:30, 9:20, 12, 3:45, and 6 in the evening. 5 waves of men advancing uphill into interlocking fields of German machine gun fire. The German casualties for that entire day were 4 soldiers killed and 21 wounded. The French survivors dug in 50 meters from the German trenches. 50 meters, close enough to hear conversations on calm nights, and close enough that a hand grenade could reach across the gap without needing to expose yourself to throw them. And there they stayed under constant fire. The largest German attempt to finally take the col came on April 25, 1916. 5 hours of sustained bombardment, more than 30,000 artillery shells, followed by 1,000 German infantrymen attacking in successive bounds towards the French trenches. But the attack failed and the French line held.
And of course, there's also the occasional relic. We're gonna see more and more of them as we're approaching the front line. Well,
so the Col de la Chapelotte stayed French, but the cost of holding it was constant. Small raids for prisoners, artillery exchanges, and men dying for meters of ground that would be lost the next week and retaken the week after that. By the time the armistice came in November 1918, more than 2,000 French soldiers had died at the Chapelotte. German casualty figures were never properly recorded, but they were almost certainly similar, probably another 2,000 men.
Now another dugout. And the blockhouse bunker, usually used for machine guns. Here you can clearly see the torn landscape, impressing. As we're getting closer to the front line, the amount of so-called blockhouse bunkers like this one increases. These bunkers were connected by underground tunnels and trenches. And you can see already how the terrain looks more and more rugged, war-torn. But still, you can see the trenches everywhere, and these modules used for these blockhouse bunkers. If we head over to the other side, there's something interesting which indicates that we're on the front line, which is...
On June 8, 1915, the Germans detonated the first mine at the Chapelotte. That explosion marked the beginning of a 28-month underground war that wouldn't end until September 2nd, 1917. 55 mine explosions over those 28 months, every single one of them concentrated on a 150-meter stretch of front line at the Haute de Fête, that high point you can see from here. The entire ridge became a testing ground for industrial-scale underground warfare. The French fired their first mine on July 15th as a counterblow. Then on August 1st and August 6th they detonated two more, not to gain ground but to collapse the German galleries they could hear being dug beneath their own positions. September 4th, 1915. The French packed 2 tons of dynamite into a chamber 11 meters below the surface. When it went off, it created a 25-meter crater in the German front line and collapsed an enemy gallery, killing 6 German miners who were working below. By the end of 1915, French listening posts began reporting something new: the sound of electric drilling machines on the German side. The Germans had brought in industrial equipment, power drills, ventilation fans and electric pumps, and they were reaching depths of 20 meters, while the French sappers were still working at 12. The French scrambled to catch up. They sank vertical shafts from their existing galleries, dropping straight down to reach the same depths. They brought in electric winches that pulled rail cars full of broken rock up to the surface, new ventilation systems to keep the air breathable, pumps to handle the groundwater, and by early 1916 both sides were digging at depths of 30 to 40 meters. August 7th, 1916, right here. The Germans detonated 80 tons of explosive in a single chamber, 50 meters across. It destroyed an entire section of French trench line in an instant. That was the last mine explosions that you could see from the surface. After that, the war went even deeper. Chambers packed below 50, 60, 70, 80 meters, where the blast would collapse enemy galleries without throwing up a visible crater. This gruesome underground war ended on September 2nd, 1917, not because either side won, and not because they reached a truce. They stopped because the ground beneath the Col de la Chapelotte had been so shattered by 55 explosions that it was too unstable to dig any further. The rock was simply fractured. The galleries kept collapsing. Both sides lost miners to cave-ins. After September 1917, the Chapelotte went quiet, or what passed for quiet in the First World War. Daily rifle fire, grenade exchanges, and raids across no man's land to capture prisoners and shake morale. Just grinding attention. No more massive explosions treating apart the rich, and no more chambers packed with tons of dynamite beneath your feet. By the time the armistice came in November 1918, the mine war at the Chapelotte had cost hundreds of lives on both sides. Men who died underground in collapsed galleries, men buried alive when enemy mines detonated beneath them, and men killed fighting over the craters that the mines left behind.
We've now approached the first French trenches. This hole right here could have been an access to the mine shaft that was dug just in the direction of the big crater. They dug it underneath to detonate tons and tons of explosives. Now that we're on the French side, you can easily see there are as many trenches and dugouts as on the German side. You can see how disturbed the landscape is by all these trenches and shell craters. An interesting thing up here is we're all probably used to German trenches being built pretty neatly, concrete, bricks, so on. But it doesn't seem to be the case up here. Maybe they didn't want to spend too much manpower or resources on the trenches up here. That's definitely a case to research, because up here both the German and French trenches look eroded alike. There's another French tunnel. Well, usually these tunnels go down for up to 15 meters, and then there would have been some caves, cave-like shelters where they stored their ammunition. They probably slept there, And of course they dug their tunnels. Regarding the French side of the front here, you see close to no concrete. Well, on the German side we saw the blockhouse bunkers and all of that, the field hospital made out of concrete. Here on the French side there's nothing to be seen made out of concrete. They just dug in raw earth, used timber, and that was basically it. Now this appears to have been like the main trench towards the French positions. I'm quite certain they have used something like a small gauge railway or something similar. Yeah, well, that might be part of a rail or just something else. Let's see. Well, yeah, that really looks like a rail system.
On the French side, the trenches sadly have almost disappeared. After a century of leaf fall and erosion, there's not much left. Some sections were reinforced with timber, but that rotted away decades ago. It's field improvisation, effective, practical, but never intended to last beyond the next offensive. The fundamental difference wasn't engineering skill, it was strategic assumption. French doctrine in 1914 was built around the offensive. You dig in temporarily, you mass your forces, you attack, you break through. Permanent fortifications meant accepting a static war, and that was unthinkable to French military planners.
Look at this landscape. Trenches, trenches, trenches in all directions. Another French tunnel. Well, there's lots of them. And another one. Here you can beautifully see the zigzag pattern of this French trench running along here. and also the occasional shell crater here as well. What a place. What a peaceful spot of land today.
So, why don't we talk about the Col de la Chapelotte? Well, no breakthrough battles, no famous generals, no decisive victory. This was a secondary theatre in the Vosges Mountains, overshadowed by Verdun, the Somme and the Marne. The first comprehensive study wasn't published until 2002. It was literally titled The Forgotten Sector of the Lorraine Front. 2,000 French soldiers died here. We don't even have solid numbers for German casualties. And that's why we are here. If you've made it this far, thank you so much for watching. A like and subscription would be highly appreciated. Please write down in the comments what you'd liked about this video, as well as suggestions or your critique. Thank you so much. I wish you a happy and joyful new year and a wonderful week. See you.